I didn't quite realize what a love affair the media had with Gary Cohn, because they sure are heartbroken over his resignation. Now, it's probably obvious to anybody who follows these things that the former president of Goldman Sachs was treated with a lot of respect by the press. He was seen as a heavyweight, as one of the adults in the room. And by the way, since he is a free trader and opposed the tariffs that the president ultimately ended up slapping, or saying he's going to slap, on steel and aluminum imports, that also happens to fit the worldview of much of the mainstream media, which thinks that tariffs are just sort of a relic of the past and they would lead to trade wars and we shouldn't have them, and therefore Gary Cohn was rather heroic in fighting that battle against them. And so with the abrupt news of his departure, primarily over the tariff battle, probably accumulation of frustrations going back more than a year, and the fact that he felt blindsided by the president's decision, Politico in its headline says, it's a quote, a blind quote by the way, that this is a disaster. The exact quote from the Politico piece: an unnamed White House official says, a lot of bad ideas have been killed with Gary gone. I think from a policy perspective, it means disaster. Politico also says that there's a brain drain now going on at the White House, of which Cohn is the latest example. And people who know how to stop Trump from moving ahead with unworkable ideas, there's now fewer of them. So the whole mindset here is, the president's going off doing crazy stuff, and people like Cohn were restraining forces on him, and now there's one fewer such person. Washington Post also saying, for example, that his resignation will leave the White House without a financial heavyweight. Remember, no replacement's been named yet. This just happened. And also that this is the latest jolt, says the Washington Post, to a White House that has been especially tumultuous in recent weeks and unable to retain some of its top talent. Well, it's true. A lot of high-profile people have been leaving. Rob Porter was pushed out. Hope Hicks deciding to leave. She's very close to the president. And now Gary Cohn. And you can go back to, Ryan's previous show on Spicer, Steve Bannon, and others. There's been a lot of turnover. Does that necessarily mean chaos? Well, according to the media, it does. But it's fascinating because you can tell when somebody leaves who the press respects and likes and admires. There's the whole way the stories are framed. The whole tone is that this is terrible. This is a setback. Now Trump can just be Trump. Press doesn't much like those lesser-known aides who are pushing him in a more populist direction on issues like global trade. Very different, for example, when Steve Bannon left and the media were practically cheering. And all this drama, I can't remember that there was such media suspense and melodrama over when Barack Obama's economic advisors, Jason Furman and Austin Goolsbee, when they were fired. It wasn't days and days of banner headlines on cable news. One last point. Cohn may be right about these tariffs. Most economists say they will help in a limited way people in the steel and aluminum industries, and they will hurt and cost more jobs for the larger economy and companies that rely on steel and aluminum to make things. But regardless, Donald Trump ran on this in the campaign. He's been saying this since the 1980s. He said he wanted to take a tougher trade posture against other countries. It now includes some of our allies as well as adversaries. And by the way, the reason he is president is Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, where there are a lot of industrial workers. In other words, this may or may not be smart economics, but it plays well his base. Gary Cohn doesn't have to run for re-election. Donald Trump does. He's the boss. He's not doing anything that he didn't say he was going to do in the campaign. But much of the press disapproves of that, approves of Gary Cohn, and therefore more bad press for the President of the United States.